Welcome to the show, Tiara.
Hi, thank you for having me.
My pleasure. My favorite question to start off with is what is your sober date?
My sober date is July 11th, 2024, so I have 131 days sober today.
Congratulations. No one's counting.
Yeah, I'm counting.
You should be. What was that's funny because my clean date from gambling was is July 13th.
Oh,
So
nice.
how many days do you have now?
131.
Okay, so I got 129 days without a bet.
That's awesome.
What was going on July 10th of this year?
So July 10th, I had just that past week moved about 1,100 miles away from my home, with the intention of moving here to get sober. Because I had tried living back home multiple times and just I couldn't get it. So I'm like, maybe I need a change of scenery. So I had moved down here that past week. I'd given myself about 5 days from my date that I got to Florida to quit drinking. So I was weaning myself down that previous week.
Tapering.
Yeah.
Now, where are you originally from?
I'm from Massachusetts and I currently live in Florida now.
I lived in Massachusetts a bunch of times.
Really?
Yep, I lived in Middleborough, Carver, Plymouth, and New Bedford.
That's
So,
awesome. I'm from Fitchburg, which is close to Worcester in central Mass.
yeah, I was gonna say that's more like Central. I was South Shore,
Yeah,
where I was living.
nice.
Growing up, did you have any siblings, any brothers or sisters?
I didn't. I was actually raised as an only child. I was also adopted at a young age.
Okay, so were you born into foster care or born into adoption?
I was born into adoption. I was actually adopted by my great uncle, so I was still in the family and knew my real mother.
Was it alcohol or drug related?
Hers was it was mostly mental illness, but alcohol and drug addiction does run very heavily in my family.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you're not the only one, that's for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
it's
so you were born, with mental health reasons. Not be, was your dad around? I guess no.
no, my biological father wasn't involved, and my biological mother was very young. She was 17. She struggled with mental health, so she decided to give me up for adoption after trying for about a year.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, you can only do so much sometimes.
Right.
Do you have a relationship with her now?
I do actually. Me and her are very close. She lives out of the country, but we're like long distance best friends, so that's pretty great.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, living out of the country is pretty cool too. I mean, can you say which country?
Yeah, she lives in Romania.
Oh wow. So that's not
Yeah.
even like UK or anything. That's are you? Is that your background?
I am a small amount Romanian, but she's mostly just there because she found it. She backpacked around like the whole world and just found that spot that she loved.
I mean, if you find that sweet spot, why leave it?
Right, exactly. She's been there about 20 years now.
That's awesome. Good for her. So you growing up, is that a small town?
So I lived in a small town up until I was about 11, and then when I was 11, I was actually uh, ECF custody from age 18. So I was kind of thrown around a lot of different places, facilities, mostly treatment centers. And
So you bounced. When did you start drinking or using?
when I was about 11 years old, I started using drugs and alcohol.
Me too. Well, alcohol.
Really?
Hmm.
Yeah, it's a really young age. A lot of people are surprised when I say that, so it's nice to hear somebody understands what that's like.
Yeah, I'll say it. I've said it before on here a bunch of times, but I want to make I don't care how many times I have to say this, but like I started drinking at 11, and I was for like just for fun. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Like my friend would sleep over, and we would sneak alcohol from my basement and make like Captain and Cokes and shit. And then
Right.
when I was 12, I started getting bullied, and I started like self medicating with
Mm-hmm.
drinking, and I would drink in my room a lot alone.
Mm-hmm.
If I was getting bullied a lot that day, I would go home and drink and feel better about it. And I started smoking weed and cigarettes when I was 13. So then I would smoke, I would drink, I would smoke cigarettes all in my room and just like hide away up there. I had friends that I hung out with, but even they would, get on me about shit. So I just would self medicate and just get drunk by myself. And by the time I was, and that to me is drinking alcoholically, at a young age. Because if I'm not drinking for fun and I'm drinking to take away feelings, then that's when you're drinking like an alcoholic, in my opinion.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what kind of drugs were you doing? How old are you now?
I'm gonna be 29 in a couple of months.
Okay. So this was 18 years ago. So this is like pre 2000. No, this is 2000s. Wow, we're getting old. So, so I'm trying to get an idea. What kind of drugs were you getting into at 11, 12 years old?
So at 11 years old, before I even really was regularly drinking, or I think it was before I had even ever tried marijuana, I was introduced to smoking crack at age 11. So that's kind of where like my story started was doing that. I was addicted to all sorts of drugs from 11 to 17.
Well,
And then
let's not blow past this whole crack thing at 11. I want to hear more about that.
right.
We don't have to skip over this. Um, so you're 11 and you try crack like most 11-year-olds do. Um,
Exactly.
most fifth graders that go home and smoke crack. How were you introduced to crack at such a young age?
So that was the same year that my adoptive mother had signed me over to state custody. So I was actually living in a group home at the time. I was the youngest girl there, so it was mostly girls who were in their older teen years. And this place
Well,
specifically, it was very low security. So
so
we were
wait,
able to yeah.
I want to know how come she signed you over when you were at 11?
So I kind of I went through puberty really young. Like I was 8 years old when I went through puberty. So I always kind of identified with older kids. So all my friends were always, a few years older than me. And so when I was 11, my friend group was, 16 and 17-year-olds. So I was doing activities that normal 16 and 17-year-olds do, but not so much normal 11-year-olds. And that was just really hard for my adoptive parents. They didn't know how to deal with that. They had never been parents before. So they really just felt like,
You're talking about sex.
no, not so much.
Okay.
That came a little bit later. It was mostly just, I wanted to hang out with my friends. I hung out with older people. I was smoking cigarettes and
Sneaking out of the
skipping
house and shit.
school, hanging out with, kids who were older and drove cars and stuff like that at the age of 11. And they just felt like they kind of didn't have control of me at all. So they had made the decision to sign me into DCF custody.
Okay, so you're in a group home, it's low security, and you're hanging
Mhm.
out with all these older kids.
Yeah. So me and one girl had decided to sneak out one night and walk into town and met up with some people that she had known. And that was when I was introduced to crack for the first time.
So you skipped alcohol and you skipped weed,
Yep.
and you were like, I'm just going to try some crack tonight.
Yep, basically.
And how was the first time you smoked crack? How did that experience go?
Honestly, the first hit that I took, I kind of just saw like my whole life flash before my eyes, like my future flash before my eyes. And I was kind of just like, yeah, I see how people give up everything for this. And I was kind of okay with it because at that point I had already been told, that I was, a troubled youth and all of this stuff. So I was kind of just going in the direction people were telling me I was going to be going in anyways.
So you were skipping a lot of milestones as an 11-year-old. Is that when you got the bat tattoo?
Which tattoo?
I
No, I got this when I was about 21.
was waiting to hear you were getting tattoos at 11 also.
No,
Um,
I did get my first one at 15. I waited a little bit for that.
now, you're 11 years old. You threw me for a loop. You're 11 years old. You try crack, and you're already smoking cigarettes. You said,
Yeah.
and you still smoke cigarettes, obviously.
Yeah, I did quit for a few years, but I picked it back up, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's hard to quit and stay quit. I'm 38 and I still haven't quit.
Right.
So I've been smoking for 25 years now. Um, which
It's
makes
hard.
me feel it makes me feel old just saying I've been smoking that long. But again, I started at 13, not 10. And
Yeah.
I didn't get caught smoking until I was 16. So
Oh well.
I was making a decent amount of time before I got caught. So you were bouncing. Did you get bounced around like group homes?
So I was in a few group homes, but I was kind of a bad child. I would try to run away, escape. I was an escaper. So I did end up getting put more so into like locked behavioral treatment facilities for most of those years. I also spent a lot of time in psych wards as well during those years.
What was your diagnosis?
They originally diagnosed me with bipolar because my biological mother was diagnosed with bipolar, but now I have a diagnosis of BPD and PTSD.
I'm bipolar.
Yeah.
And so is my wife. We're both bipolar. So,
Oh,
but we work on it. You know what I mean? We're not just sick. Like we both have psychiatrists. We both have therapists.
right.
My wife does recovery Dharma, and I do NA. So we're both sober, and we smoked weed for a while. I quit weed back April 1st, and my wife quit smoking weed October 1st.
Oh, that's
So
all.
now we're a smoke free household. My wife quit vaping over the summer and has been kind of getting me to quit cigarettes, but I was like, "You're 40. You stopped when you were 40, so I'll stop when I'm 40."
That's
So
awesome that you're so supportive of each other and both, always working on being better.
and we do marriage counseling too, and
Nice.
that helps. We do everything because we're codependent
Hmm.
because we've been together since like pre-COVID. So we're codependent on each other too. So we really rely on each other. So we decided to start marriage counseling too. So like we're working on ourselves in every sense of the imagination when it comes to, trying to get better. And, when did you discover drinking?
So I discovered drinking maybe around the age of like 13. But up until the age of 17, I was really more into using substances and drugs. When I had decided to get clean from hard drugs at the age of 17, almost 18. So when I quit the drugs, that was really when alcohol came into play and took its hold and,
All right.
definitely ruined
Well, let's see here. 11 years old, you try crack. Um, what other drugs did you get introduced to and how old were you?
So I was addicted to heroin multiple times. The longest time was when I was 15 to 17. I was on heroin. I also had a short 6-month addiction with meth when I had moved out to California. that was a crazy experience to say the least.
Yeah,
Uh, and I mean, I've tried all like, the hallucinogenics and stuff like that too, but the harder drugs, I never did do IV like needle drugs, but I was smoking black tar heroin and snorting it as well.
yeah. We're out in California.
Anaheim.
We just missed each other. I was in Los Angeles when I got sober.
Yeah, Anaheim was actually I was born there, but when I was adopted as a baby, it was when I came to Massachusetts, but I still have family out in California.
Oh, okay. Did you get bounced around California too as a teenager?
I moved out there for the first time when I was 17, and that was when I had like my last like kind of drug binge, and then I moved back home to Massachusetts to get sober from the drugs.
Okay, so you were bad on drugs from 11 to 17.
Yeah.
And, you're 28 now.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm getting this timeline straight in my head. And you you were a heroin addict in your teen years.
Yeah, crack and heroin, but I definitely preferred my drug of choice was the downers. I liked heroin more.
Yeah, me too. I was a more of a downer with opiate, benzos. Um,
Right.
I didn't like
Bonapens.
I didn't like speed stuff. Like in 25 years of drinking and using, I never got into meth or crack. I was way more like Xanax and Oxy kind of guy. Smoke
Right.
weed, snort Oxy, drink, eat a benzo. That kind of night was my kind of night. I did like acid a lot. And whenever I did acid, everything was right in the world. Like acid
Okay.
was a wonder drug for me.
So
I don't like mushrooms. What's
I'm
that?
the opposite. I'm the opposite. I like mushrooms, but I'm not big on acid.
Yeah, no, I was the opposite. I don't like shrooms. Um, I have like a weak stomach, and it would always make me throw up, and I never liked doing that. Alcohol made me throw up a lot too, but I still did that. So, who knows how my addict brain works? So, who, what gave you the idea to get clean at 17?
I guess at that point I was hanging out with, a lot of older addicts who were, in their 50s and 60s and stuff. And I guess one night I looked around where I was because, like I was in like, a crack house, everybody just doped up all over the place. And I remember just looking at a couple of the older people in the room and I'm like, is that really where I truly want to be? Down the line. And I realized that if I didn't quit then when I had the strength that maybe I never would. So I just didn't want to end up like that.
So you've really jumped up ages a lot in your life. You're 10, 11 years old, hanging out with 17, 16, 18-year olds. And now you're 16, 17, 18. You're like, fuck these 16, 17-year olds. I'm going to hang out with 60-year olds.
Yeah, because people my age, they were casually doing drugs and alcohol here and there. I was more of like a hardcore user. Like I just went straight all the way to the top or the
Yeah, you
bottom.
really, yeah, to the bottom. Now, when you got clean, was it just a geographical thing that helped you get clean, or did you do any kind of programming?
I didn't do any kind of programming. My father, my adoptive father, he's in AA. So I had kind of grown up around the program. He used to take me to meetings when I was a small child and go to the cookouts and all this type of stuff. So I was attending meetings occasionally with my dad, and I would just because at that point, I didn't identify as an alcoholic. I was an addict. So I would just kind of take what I would hear in meetings and use it to how it pertained to me, but I never worked the steps. I never got a sponsor or anything like that. I was just kind of, soaping up some knowledge from what my dad was doing with his program.
Yeah, and that's how you. Now, when did you get into? Because like, it sounds like you weren't really drinking at all as a teenager, because at that time, drinking as a teenager, like that's for kids in your
Right.
mind.
I I was drinking sometimes, but it was really came second to the drugs because at that point, I was still under 21. It was easier
Yeah.
for me to go get a bag of drugs than it was for me to find an adult to go buy me a bottle of alcohol. So drugs, as weird as it is, were just way more accessible.
Well, you're not getting carded when you're buying drugs. No one's You're
Right.
not getting carded when you try to buy drugs. They don't care how old you are,
Exactly.
obviously. And did you look like you were young when you were young?
No, I didn't. I looked a lot older. I did lie to people and tell them, I was older than I was. Because I'm like, they're not gonna, they probably would have sold me drugs knowing I was 11, but I'm like, they're more likely to if they think I'm 16. So I did look a little older. I looked like I was like 17 or 18.
And the makeup didn't hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's but the friend in your group home knew that you were 11.
Yeah, yeah. She herself was only maybe 15, 16 possibly.
And the group homes were in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Okay. And then once you got old enough, you went to California.
Yeah, so I was in the programs in DCF custody from 11 to 17. And at age 17 they allowed me to sign myself out, and that's when I moved to California and stayed with my biological aunt for I was only out there for about 7 months before I just got too deep in the addiction that I had to leave.
I was gonna say, how are you finding connections?
I would just like go on like websites like chat groups and stuff or dating sites and just, find older people, find people that use drugs.
That's pretty smart.
Yeah.
Using a dating app in order to find drugs. You
Yeah. Oh yeah.
were an entrepreneur. So when you decide that it was enough for you, like luckily for you, you were hanging out with older people to where like it was like looking into a mirror where you said to yourself, this life probably isn't for me.
Mhm.
Now, and you go back to Massachusetts, you're living with your adopted dad and mom, and you go to AA meetings here and there, I take it.
Yeah, I would go occasionally. I was living on my own at that point when I came back. I was living with an ex-boyfriend. We had been together for a while. When I went out to California and had that drug binge, me and him had been on a separation. We had broken up. So when I got back to Massachusetts, we got back together and moved in again.
How old was he?
I was 17, he was 21.
I figured he had to be over 20 with your track record.
Yeah, we had met when I was like 15, one of the times that I had escaped from one of my facilities, and we had been together for a few years at that point.
Were you working too?
I was actually working. I was able to hold down a job for about that first year, but that was so the first year after I quit the drugs, that was like the longest term job I had had to date, like since alcohol took over. It's weird. I was a more functional, newly sober addict than I was as an alcoholic. But
So you still haven't had drugs 11 years later.
yeah, yeah, I just celebrated my 11 years, actually earlier this month.
Well, congratulations on 11 years. That's fucking huge.
I will
Um,
admit, not count marijuana in that. When I say the drugs, I'm talking about, like the hard drugs.
no, I
But
don't
yeah,
consider the only reason I quit smoking weed is because it wasn't serving me anymore and I was abusing it.
right.
Um, like after my dad passed away, I started smoking all day, every day.
Hmm.
Waking up with the bowl next to me and hitting the bowl just to get out of bed. and then smoke all day. I work from home, so I don't have to go into the office. So I'm able to smoke while I work from home all day. So I was just, luckily nobody from my work watches this that for me to admit that. But that's why I quit, and I quit benzos at the same time.
Mhm.
So I was going to quit benzos like Valium. I was addicted to, and I was getting prescribed it. I was just abusing it every time I got it, and I was abusing it. And so when I decided to quit Valium, I decided to quit weed at the same time. So I'm all for anybody using it like in their recovery because I've seen it work for myself. It's helped me stay off of opiates almost 7 years later. So it just
Wow.
wasn't serving me anymore. And that's why I stopped smoking it, basically.
Right.
Um, so 11 years without drugs, which is awesome. Congrats again.
Yeah.
Um, I know how hard that is. I'll have 7 years in April when it
Oh,
comes
congrats.
to thank you. And that's from buying street drugs because my weed that I used to get was from a dispensary. My benzos were from a pharmacy.
Right.
So the drugs I was abusing, I was getting legally. And
Mhm.
so I haven't bought any illegal drugs since April 24th of 2018.
Oh,
So I'll
nice.
have 7 years on April 25th away from all kind of street drugs. Um,
Mm.
so I haven't had to meet somebody in the shady parking lot in 7 years.
Right.
Like, oh my God. So when did alcohol really take off for you?
So I would say maybe around the age of like 19, 20 is when it started to get bad. But the last like 4 years of my drinking, like these last four recent years, like it was really bad. Like I was hardly even human, hardly functionable. Like my life was just completely 100% unmanageable towards the end of it.
I like how you use the word unmanageable. So you're definitely in a program now.
Yes, I am. I am very, very involved in AA now.
Yep, I knew it. I could have told you that as soon as you said unmanageable.
Yes. Actually, I'm
That's
working on my step right now.
you're on your fourth.
Yeah.
I'm on my first. I'm in NA now this time. I did
Oh, nice.
AA 6 years ago and it worked and I went through the steps and it was amazing. But with my relapse that I had, it wasn't anywhere because of drinking. And, I want to be able to respect the fellowship and not talk about drugs in AA. I don't want to talk about weed in AA. I don't want to talk about benzos in AA.
Hmm.
And in NA, I can talk about alcohol. So I decided to do NA meetings this time around, and it's a lot different. Um, you get this book, and there's all these are all questions that you have to like answer in order to do the steps. So it's a lot more intense than going through the steps in AA.
That's kind of
Like,
how my sister is doing it with me. I've almost written a book with all my step work so far. She has
yeah.
me answering all these deep, deep questions. And then I have friends who are in the program and they're like, yeah, me and my sponsor just chit-chatted for an hour and they said I'm done with this step. I'm like, I have to do all this paperwork, basically.
You got a good sponsor.
I do.
Um, my favorite part of step one is after the semicolon is my life was unmanageable. That's my favorite part about step one is that unmanageability
Hmm.
because people will say to me all the time like, oh, I could drink more than you, I'm not an alcoholic. And I would just be like, well, is your life unmanageable? No,
Right.
your bills are paid, you don't have any DUI. I never had a DUI, luckily, but like I don't your life isn't in shambles. And maybe you can outdrink me, but I was drinking to escape and not drinking to celebrate. And that's how we're
Right.
different. And that's why I'm an alcoholic. It's not how much I was drinking, it's why I was drinking. And
Exactly.
So that's why, it's easy to admit you were an alcoholic, in my opinion. It's easy to look back and say, yeah, I was an alcoholic. I drank a lot. But the most important thing about step one is it was your life unmanageable. And
Right.
as soon as you said your life was unmanageable for the last 4 years, I was like, okay, so she has a program that she works.
Yes, yes, now I
Uh,
do. I've always been familiar with AA because of my father, but this is
yeah.
my first time ever really working it and being involved with it.
Now, do you have a sponsor from Massachusetts or a sponsor in Florida?
She's in Florida, yeah, in my home group.
So you found a sponsor pretty quickly when you got down there?
I did. I was actually very thankful. I got my sponsor after about 3 weeks of being sober, and I was so terrified to have to ask someone to be my sponsor. Like I felt like I was asking someone to be my girlfriend or my boyfriend. And but this woman actually approached me and told me, if you're looking for a sponsor, I would like you to know that I'm willing to do that for you. And she told me to take like a week to think about it, get to know some of the other women, make sure I didn't think there was someone else who would be a better fit. But I told her, yes, I would love for you to be my sponsor. And she's been great with me. She's helped me a lot.
So, give me some examples of how your life was unmanageable in your 20s.
So I've had multiple really severe injuries due to my drinking. One of the most recent ones, I got very violent with the alcohol. I would kind of go into PTSD flashbacks from when I was a child and I was in locked facilities. Um, and I would black out and I would put holes in walls. I had a whole graveyard of, dozens of broken TVs. My apartment just looked like something crazy had just happened there. There was usually blood on the walls, and I would attack people. I was violent. I was that type of drunk, and so the when I had to have major surgery on my hand recently because I got drunk and I started stabbing the wall with a steak knife and my hand slipped down onto the blade and I severed a couple of tendons, had like no use of my right arm, had to have some pretty serious surgery on that. And that's just one of the many stories similar to that. I struggle with self-harm as well. So when I would black out from the alcohol, that could get very scary. I don't know if you can like see like I have like scars on my neck. I'm completely covered in scars. And I would self-harm while I was blackout drunk, which was really dangerous because I had no idea how deep I was going or what was going on. I would wake up in the hospital with 35 stitches the next day, shackled to a bed and have no idea how I got there.
So you weren't, because I know a lot of people when they self harm, you're not the first cutter that I've had on the show.
Mhm.
And a lot of people have told me that their most part of their body they would cut is their thigh.
Mhm.
Was that the case for you with your thighs?
No, see, I feel like that's true for a lot of people who are going to the effort of hiding it, but I got into self-harm when I was really young in those programs. So my whole life like I'm completely covered head to toe in scars. There's no hiding it. So I had never really my thighs, I do have them all over my thighs, but my arms are pretty crazy. I don't know if it's inappropriate to show on the show
You
or
can show.
not, but
You can show if you
okay, so
want to.
like
Okay.
that's my arm. Yeah, like so both of them are like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my
How
whole body
long's it
looks like
how long's it been since you cut?
it's been since as long as I've been sober. Um, so about 4.5 months now. And it's always something like I did start doing it when I was a teenager, obviously, but as I got older, it was really something I only ever did when I was really drunk. Because obviously, alcohol is a depressant and whatnot, but it was something that I haven't really struggled with in a long time when I'm sober, but when I get drunk, that's usually how the night ends up.
Yeah, I can see that. So you've had countless stitches then over the years.
Oh yeah, a lot.
Are you in any kind of program for the self harm, or are you working through that in your step work?
I'm not in any kind of program for it. I was in therapy a good 5 years ago. But I wasn't really being honest with the therapy because at that point, I was still in denial that I was really an alcoholic. I'm like, maybe it's just my mental health. Once I get my mental health under control, then I can drink like a normal person. But that wasn't the case. So I wasn't really being honest with my therapist. She didn't know that all of these issues were really stemming from alcohol. Like,
Yeah, I would get into therapy again
yeah, I have wanted to.
because it's like going being an NA and doing this show. This is like my sober hobby. I don't get paid anything to do this show. In fact, I pay $9 a week to host this show through this website.
Mhm.
So I literally pay money to do this show. I don't have any advertisers, no ads or anything like that. It's my sober hobby. So
Right.
between therapy, this, NA, step work, psychiatry that I do once a month, there's a lot of different ways that I feel like I need to work on myself. And the step work is a great tool, is a great thing to where you're going to learn a lot about yourself. But
Hmm.
therapy is like a great thing to do on top of it. And we're addicts, like we're drug addicts. So if we're going to take your addiction to the extreme, we should be taking the recovery to the extreme, because you're not
Yeah,
just recovering from alcohol and drugs, you're recovering from everything.
exactly.
Who diagnosed you BPD?
So that was the therapist that I was seeing. I was about 21, so it was a while ago. But she was a therapist that I had been seeing right after I had gotten out of DCF. I had had the same therapist for a couple of years, and me and her were pretty close. But I stopped going because like we had the relationship where it felt kind of more like buddies. Like I would just go in, we would shoot the shit, talk about whatever was going on that day, but we weren't getting down to the root traumas and the serious stuff that needed to be talked about. So that's why I stopped seeing her.
Yeah, that happens sometimes where you kind of blur the lines. I know, like, I just had therapy today and I was asking how she was doing at some
Right.
points, or like, well, how are you doing, Kristen? Like,
Yeah.
not, this isn't just about me. This is about you. How are you doing?
Mhm.
Um, but it's my way to like feel comfortable because in order for me to open up, I need to have that person I'm opening up to be open and honest with me too, and
Right.
vulnerable with me for me to feel comfortable. I don't know if that's some, and like I can't do that having a man therapist. I tried having a man as a therapist and I just completely shut down. I don't open up. I don't know what it is. I have a man as a sponsor. He's got 30 years sober or clean, sober, whatever the fuck you want to call it. But he's got 30 years without touching a drink or a drug. And he's based out of Providence, actually. Um, and because I do NA via Zoom, because
Mhm.
there's like, I live in the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania. There's no
Oh, I was just
NA.
yeah 3 days ago.
Oh, where are you? What part of
Yeah,
Pennsylvania were you in?
I was in
Where?
Pittsburgh.
Oh, okay.
Pittsburgh.
Yeah, that's about 4 hours west of me.
Nice.
I'm from the Philadelphia area originally. That's where my accent's from. Somehow
That's cool.
you don't have a Massachusetts accent. How did you escape that?
I don't know. I think honestly, being in the programs and the DCF places for so long, a lot of the staff workers that worked there weren't from the area. So I don't know. I feel like I mean everybody in my family has it really bad. My grandmother has been living in Florida for 20 years. She hasn't even stepped foot in Massachusetts in forever, and she sounds like your typical straight from Boston.
Straight from Worcester.
Yeah, what's the when I get excited or angry, it does come out.
No, I believe you. I believe that. That
Yeah.
happens to anybody, and I'm sure when you would drink, that would come out too.
Oh
Those
yeah.
are
Or if I'm around somebody that has a really thick Boston accent, sometimes mine will start to come out too.
it would creep out. Yeah, I've lived all over the country, and I've noticed that like when I'm back home I'm from South Jersey, right outside of Philly, and
Mhm.
we say use guys, like hey use
Yeah,
guys.
right,
Instead of saying down south they say y'all,
right.
and in Jersey we say use, or instead of like right now there's a pool full of water in behind you, but instead of water we say water.
I love that.
So we say things like phone and home, like we say like different things weird. And I didn't know that until I lived in Massachusetts. I was like, oh, that's what I sound like.
Right.
Like, and
Massachusetts, we
morning,
call it's our R's. It's like, park the car, like up the
I, li-
stairs.
I lived in Cava,
Yeah.
yep, in New Bedford. So I
Mhm.
can pull out my Boston accent too when I want to. I lived in Plymouth and all over there for 6 years off and on. So because of my addiction, I kept moving. I moved 31 times in 12 years
Wow.
and lived in 5 different states. I bounced around. It was just mayhem. I kept going with myself wherever I would go. Um, and how long did you last with that boyfriend when you started drinking at 19?
We were together a total of 5 years, but it was really like makeup, breakup, back and forth, not really a consistent 5 years.
And so you're broken up now then.
Yeah, I haven't seen him in a long time. I'm currently in a 7-year relationship. We just celebrated 7 years.
Okay, so you both went down to Florida together.
Yeah, yeah. Well, right now we lived in Florida together for 4 years. Went back up to Massachusetts for a couple years, and right now he's actually flying down this weekend. I'm picking him up at the airport. But I've been down here for a few months first, so I could kind of get things together and start establishing stuff down here.
So you were in Florida during your drinking years?
I was. It was when COVID first happened. I had been down in Florida for about 2 years at that point, and I went back to Massachusetts about a year after that. So I was drinking in Florida pretty heavily.
And your boyfriend doesn't drink or anything?
So he's starting the journey. He wasn't a violent alcoholic like I was and as crazy as I was. I think that had to do with the fact that I also have PTSD. He's starting the journey into AA right now. So he's at the beginning stage of, kind of step one.
Well, that's good. At least you'll have that kind of support because it always works better. Like I said, my wife does recovery Dharma and I do NA, and we both have our separate programs and both respect each other's recoveries. Um,
Right,
and if us two can be sober, I feel like anybody can be sober because the way we drank. So
right.
I got faith that you guys can figure it out and,
Yeah.
make it work. You're still young enough. But I'm so glad that you're 11 years. What's the date for your 11 years?
It was November 9th, I believe. November 8th or 9th.
That's awesome. I'm really glad
Yeah.
I got to meet you, Tiara. Thank
Thank
you again
you.
for coming on and telling your story because, there's people that have been through, the same kind of story as you that are going to be able to relate to what you're talking about because you're not the first person that I talked to that started drinking and using at a young age. So I like having people on here tell their story and having people to connect to. So I appreciate you being so open and honest about your story.
Thank you for having me. This was a really good experience for me, and this is helping my sobriety too, coming on here because I'm really scared to share in meetings sometimes. I'm not a big sharer, so this was a step for me, and I'm really happy that I did it, and I appreciate
But
you and everything you're doing with this.
I appreciate that, Tiara. Have a great day.
Thank you. You as well.